Hello, and welcome to Strange Dominions, where we attempt to unlock the mysteries beyond the unseen and unheard, unknown and unknowable. I am your host, Octavian Graves. Hello, patrons. I am really excited for you to hear this show because it was a ton of fun to record. We continue our conversation with Elisabeth. We talk a lot about modern magic, old magic, and a lot of other really cool stuff. I believe we have some new patrons here, so if you are new, and if you are old, make an introduction under this post. Just say who you are, how long you've been a patron, what you like about the show, what you don't like about the show, or anything else. I would really love to hear from you guys. For those of you at the $8 tiers, I will be getting stickers out to you within a week or so, with holidays coming up. Might be a little bit difficult to get shipments out, but I'm going to do my best. As always, patrons, we could not do the show without you. You are the lifeblood of this show, and we really, really appreciate you being here. So, with all that being said, thank you so much. And now, to bring you our second part of the interview with Elisabeth Empyrean. All right, this is the patron segment with Elisabeth Empyrean.
Hey.
How you doing?
I'm good. Good stuff.
Hello again. It's been forever.
So we talked a lot about interesting stuff during the main show, but I'm curious, as a ceremonial magician, how, does that color your view of other practices, and do you have any kind of opinions on, the differences between what we'll call old world grimoire magic and modern magic or new magic?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm not really I am opinionated about those kinds of things. Not necessarily that I think other people are wrong for their practices, never anything like that. But just because I used to do kind of more like modern, kind of, I don't want to call it wishy-washy, but it's kind of wishy-washy sometimes. I had more like loosely based practices. I think I benefited a lot from having an actual really structured, like really trying to follow it by the book kind of practice. I benefited a lot from that, and I really think that other people would too. It's just, I feel like you really need a good foundation before you go wandering off and doing whatever you like intuitively feel is right. And it's not going to be for everyone, because not everyone wants to be like balls to the wall. Like I don't expect everyone to be as obsessed as I am. You can totally get away with just doing some folk spells. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that at all. But I do think that you can get a lot out of having an actual established tradition behind, like, as your foundation to your practice. And I say this because, like I said, I used to do a lot of more loosely based kind of here and there kind of stuff. And I would get some results and have some weird things happen. And I would be like, oh, this is so cool. Magic is really so interesting. And then I started doing this and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is what magic could have been this entire time. The results that I've had from this stuff and the journey it's taken me on has blown me away. And it was so much crazier and so much more powerful and so much more potent than anything I had done prior to this. It's like, we're talking about making contact with entities that tell me how to make tools and they actually work, and like telling me things that actually come true and making things happen that are crazy. Like, never experienced anything like this. And I think that I think other people could get a lot out of it. And so it's like, when I see people, I don't know, it's like people know that I do these things, right? Like, if you're friends with me on Facebook, I post about this stuff all the time. I have no filter. I have friends and family. This is literally just my personal Facebook, because I don't care.
I'm the same way.
I'm a tattoo artist, and I don't really have an actual boss who could fire me for this stuff, nor would he. So I'm just like, why not just be crazy? Like, my family, they already think I'm nuts, so who cares? So it's like, I just post about this stuff, and it's so aggravating because I do have other occultists on my friends list. That's not the aggravating part. The aggravating part is when I know that they see me doing this stuff and they comment on it and they think it's interesting, and then they ask some sort of a question about spirits and the way that they behave. And I try to say, like, well, you should probably do this, because, like, in my interactions with the spirits, it is important to be clear. It is important to be concise. It is important to have some boundaries between you and them, depending on what kind of a spirit it is. Obviously, like I've talked about, angelic spirits, you can kind of get away with letting them get a little closer to you because they're probably not going to fuck you up. But, like, other spirits might. And, like, it always grinds my gears when somebody comes back with something like, oh, but my friend said it's all about the intention. And I just want to, it's like, why did you even ask this question? Here I am telling you, I have all this experience with spirits, and you're still trying to give me this, like, kind of bullshit answer about intentions. I'm not saying that intentions aren't important, but I don't want to be told these things by law of attraction, people. I don't.
We've had a lot of these discussions on, like, the distinguish between, I think it's the internet. And I think it's a lot of people, like, how you always kind of see the shallowest, least, or, most common denominator. And I'm not trying to talk crap on people, but
we are.
Yeah.
Well,
we are.
Well, you know what I mean? It's like, I was joking around the other day, and I was like, you remember those old, like, MySpace, like, goth subculture archetypes where you get to tag your friends?
Yes.
I wanted to make one of those where just, like, tag the random people you always see on occult threads. And it's like here, here's the generic grimoirist who's just, like, gonna say their thing. Then there's the indigo child. Then there's the person who always is on there saying, we all are one.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm going to say something that is irrelevant to this entire conversation. And then somebody who says, hail Lucifer. And you're like, all right, maybe.
Maybe.
18 comments later, you will find somebody who's read a book or done a spell.
Yes, who has some practical knowledge of any of this. Like,
one of the first, like, big signs to me that I was kind of on the right path was I was at an occult store called the Crystal Fox near me in Maryland, and I was looking for different grimoires that they had. It was a very slim pickings because it's mostly a New Age store, and there was a girl and her friend standing next to me, and she was complaining, and she was like, I have been doing Wicca for 5 years, and I have done exactly as I have been told every single time, and nothing happens. Nothing happening at all. And so I just pulled down, I was going to get it, but I was like, here, I pulled down the Lesser Key from Peterson's Lesser Key, and I was like, here you go. Try this. Just look at it and let me know what you think. And I realized, like, okay, so this is why I'm doing this, because I want real results. And a lot of this stuff that people are doing in the New Age and the modern style, it's not results oriented, and it's probably really frustrating.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's a lot of the New Age stuff is based around, it's almost like self-help, right?
Right, exactly.
Which, I mean, there's nothing necessarily. So a caveat to this is that working with angels has completely changed my life and completely changed me. You do have to become a better person if you want spirits to like you.
It's built, like, the self-help is built into it, but there's more to it than that.
There's much more to it than that. And the thing is that it is not comfortable. It is not fun. It's horrible sometimes, but, like, you will work through the things about yourself that you can't stand, and suddenly you will find yourself free of those things, and it's wonderful. And that may not be everyone's mileage, right? I mean, if you're working with non-angelic things, you may not have this happen to you, but I do feel like the benefit of working with celestial entities is that they will actually make an effort to try to not just give you temporary results. They will make an effort to, like, rearrange everything about you and everything in your life to make it so that it's the way that you actually want to be, and you don't even know it. That's kind of the difference there, but that's not what the New Age self-help is. It's just, I think, honestly, it's probably doing more harm than good. It's not assessing the real problems. It is very temporary, just like anything else, I mean, it's not that there's anything wrong with temporary. I mean, goodness knows, like, the goetic spirits and stuff, they are there to give you money, to get laid, to get whatever. I mean, it's all temporary stuff, and, like, we all like those things sometimes, right? But I just think that sometimes we get so caught up in those temporary things that we start to lose track of what we actually want, or maybe we never even knew. I mean, that's really the whole reason, I think, for all the HGA stuff from Bromelain, is that you're not trying to change. You're trying to go back to the way that you really were before society kind of like made you into whatever you thought you had to be. You know, it is like,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a really good way of putting it.
It's getting the magic back. It is magic. You know, we all had that when we were kids. Where did it go?
Mm-hmm.
It didn't go anywhere. You know, so. But it's New Age stuff is a lot of self-help. So.
And I think the thing that annoys the hell out of me is so much of the New Age, it wants to make you feel bad for being human and wanting human things. Whereas ceremonial magic, it's like, you know what? You can have those things, but in the process of getting those things, we're going to make you a better person. So you'll have it. You just are going to get to a point where you won't need it anymore.
Exactly.
But it doesn't tell you that you can't have it.
And that, you know, that's something, this is actually a subject that I've thought a lot about the last couple of years. And, you know, a lot of the New Age, you know, it's hard to umbrella it, but a lot of the attitude and approach, like a lot of the New Age comes from sources that a lot of people don't realize. Like some of it's like the New Thought movement, you know, from back in the 1920s or even further. And some really weird sources like the channel movements from the 50s and 60s. And they're still at play. And a lot of the techniques that they're using for like The Secret or, you know, the law of attraction, it's like a surface level approach to parts of viable, powerful techniques. But they're not approached in a way that always even help you. It's like you take this seed that, if taken under a different lens in a tradition or a taught tradition, say, because there's some magicians and people who are directly taught by spirits, but they still have the discipline. But you're right, and I think a lot of it can be more harmful. And at the risk of sounding a little paranoid, like I've kind of broken it down, because I know we've all met people who are really invested, not just talking about like Wiccans, but people who are really, really invested in certain New Age lines of thought, and it becomes their whole life. And I think you had it, Octavian, because I noticed time and time again, the core of it, it's kind of painted with this whole, like, you know, you're going to be positive thinking and you're going to shed all this, your old self, and you're going to reach 5D or enlightenment. But if you break that down, what's really going on here is you are kind of subconsciously saying, I am broken and I need to be fixed. Like I need to be replaced. I'm not good enough the way I am. I need to have a higher self that I need to replace my current self with. Which, you think about it, magic's about not only power, but heart. And if you say the person you were born as, you know, that you are naturally I believe we come into this world perfect, in a way. You know, we are exactly who we need to be. We always have room to grow. But if you have that programming, especially in the spiritual system, that everything you're doing or experiencing is like you have to correct, because you're not good enough the way you are. You have to replace yourself with something. And a lot of them, they end up the sense that they're invoking a force outside of them that replaces their personality, which it's kind of viewed in a really positive way. But I'm skeptical of that. And this is a little paranoid, I know, but it's almost like who they are it's almost like they're inviting another entity or force to replace their self. And they get that, you know, glassy-eyed, don't have negative thinking. I don't know, maybe I'm being weird to that, but you know what I mean? Like, if you break it down, and I might be totally off base, and certainly not with the entire New Age. I think I'm thinking of folks like the Starseed movements and things like that. It almost seems like a very positively wrapped system of almost like willing possession. And so I guess I'm a little skeptical of it. I don't know. I never
thought of it like that. That is really like kind of alarming and weird. Now
It is, but think
like
about
that,
it. Think
you're
about it.
saying
Like,
this, I'm like, wait a second.
yeah,
That is
think about it.
exactly what
Like,
they're doing.
when you have, they're contacting spirits who are basically like pretending to be, I don't know if they're pretending, but it's like, to me, there's not really a difference. Like, if you look at it from that experience of working with spirits, because some spirits can absolutely lie.
Oh,
But
yeah.
if you are telling yourself and convincing yourself that who you are isn't correct or is broken, and then you dedicate your spiritual heart into replacing it or fixing it, and you end up having a very practical, if you look at it, because they all kind of have that same idea that, oh, well, my higher self is reaching down. And, a lot of them also, they take different names after that. It's like, oh, I'm now this name from this galaxy, and I'm this kind of entity. And like, I didn't realize that was a thing, but spending time, there's like thousands and thousands of people who are like into that. And that's kind of like, and they're not, and a lot of them seem to come from a base of trauma.
Yeah.
And it almost, not to say that we all aren't, but if you look at it that way, and it is kind of alarming, a lot of these came from like the channelers from the 50s and 60s, and this will branch into our topics of like paranormal stuff too, because a lot of these channeled beings express themselves as extraterrestrials, but they had more in common with higher spiritual beings of some sort, beings of light.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what if you do, where you have somebody who's honestly looking, who's kind of saying, hey, I'm not good enough, so I want to replace who I am with this outside force that just told me that it is my higher self. And that's kind of an alarming thing, because I've worked with angels through my practice too, and you get a lot of people who work with the occult that, they say they work with angels and things like that, but the beings they're describing don't act like angels in my experience. Like in my experience, angels they never have a problem if you question them, like, or ask them to prove themselves. They don't manipulate. They don't really bargain. They're going to help you if they help you, but they're different from like goetic spirits and elementals. Like they just, in my experience, they don't do it. They're going to just tell you the way it is, and they're honest. Like, to a fault, they're honest. They might craft something in a way, maybe for a lesson, but it's never malicious. It's never manipulative. And that's the thing. Like, I've never heard of an angel berate you, for instance, because I've heard a lot of talk, like people who are like, well, this angel like contacted me and it was like, you were a filthy person and you're wrong and all that. Like, that's not, I don't even think that's in their nature.
I mean, I've had a couple of them get kind of stern with me, but it's because I was not doing things right. I wasn't, like I was doing things that probably were going to put me in harm's way. It's
Absolutely.
Like I wasn't performing the way I should have in my practice. And it's like, well, now you have the eyes of all these other beings. So like you probably should not be acting the way that you're acting. And like I've had them talk to me in that sort of way, but they've never, told me I was awful or anything.
Yeah.
Like that.
And
They'll tell you when you're doing a wrong thing. They'll tell you when you're doing the wrong thing and say like, hey, you need to shape up. But, they're not going to be dicks about it. Right.
And, that's our best friends will be real with us like that. That's not a bad, to be stern and correcting is different from like, kind of, I'm not going to go into it, but one of the harshest and most powerful experiences I had in my spiritual path kind of gave me a certain amount of discernment about that. And it struck with me. Maybe people will disagree, but angels specifically will not ask you to make deals with them. They will not try to convince you to make bargains. Yeah. And maybe other people, but you know what I mean by that? Where it's like, hey,
they might ask you to fuck your best friend's wife, but they won't make deals with you.
I'm not convinced that Mr. D and Mr. Kelly were talking about the same kind of angels, but you never know. I think that was probably Mr. Kelly trying to.
I've never had an angel ask me to fuck anybody's wife, so that checks out. That may not be what those were.
You made a post a little bit ago about people on TikTok god spousing demons. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I found that really funny.
Oh, can you just refresh me on this before? Because I missed that post, but I'm here for it.
God spousing. Okay, so like being the spouse or being like devoted to in almost like a marriage kind of sense is not like a new concept. That's something that's authentic and real.
Oh, yeah.
Just, there's plenty of gods that do not have any sort of God spousing like heritage or anything like that. And to be honest, I couldn't tell you which ones do. I don't really know a lot about it, but what I can tell you is that I don't think that, like demons or Loki or like any of these spirits that everyone writes fan fictions about them getting to have sex with them, like that they're not the spirits that you really end up God spousing. So it's basically like this God spousing thing is basically New Age people claiming that they're married to a god, but really all it is, I'm certain, is just their LARPing fantasies of them getting to bone Loki or whatever Marvel character they're obsessed with right now.
And that's kind of how I view demonolatry, and I'm pretty hard on them. And I will be honest, like, I really feel like they are just LARPing this whole thing, trying to be the edgiest LARPers they can be.
I gotta cut in with one comment about this before we move on from it. Is the idea of God spouse, because they're calling this, talking about this situation, like probably in like the witch talk crowd. It is a viable and real practice in certain traditions, but again, It goes back to the level of, and I'm thinking voodoo especially.
Yes,
that is, and we can't really, I'm not prepared to go into a whole. Speaking of uninitiated tradition, I'm not initiated in, but that is a big part of that. But the distinction is a level of depth and respect, and a lot of these guys probably on TikTok are not in the same way, because you're talking about like that's a family. This is an initiated house versus you just really like the idea of this spirit and kind of being maybe a little bit delusional about it.
It's not supposed to be a sexual fantasy driven practice with spirit, but that's exactly what it is with most of these people. And basically the post that I made was like, people will really have the gall to like, God spouse a demon and then complain for the next 100 posts about how their life is falling apart. It's like,
I'm very depressed. Well,
no shit.
You kind of gave it a swizzle straw that lights up and stuck it right into your energy center.
Oh, I swear. It's like you decided to do a marriage ceremony with Belial the Worthless One, and now you don't understand why everything is
worthless.
Going by. Insane to me. Insane.
And the demon's like, well, you got what you asked for.
But it's like
these
people
who I am.
who I see on TikTok who are saying like, oh, we worship Payman. Payman's a great father. He's a great teacher. Like, do you know what happened to the last guy who tried to summon Payman? A tornado ripped through France, and it hadn't ripped through France in like 300 years, and it tore the dude's house apart. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah. They're not like, it's just, and this is why people can say whatever they want. I feel like there is definitely a certain crowd that's like, oh, you work with angels, lame. Like, and it's like, they can say whatever they want, but my life,
they've never met one.
I have the things that I need and that I want. I am doing well mentally, physically, emotionally. Like, can these people say the same thing? It's important. It's important to align yourself with entities that actually make some fucking sense. Like, it just...
Yes.
Sorry, I'm not saying you can never work with demonic spirits. You can never work with chthonic spirits. It's just, do not ever assume that these entities are your best buddies, unless for some reason you worked with them a bunch and they actually seem like they have pulled through for you. Mm-hmm. But I definitely don't think it's a good idea in those circumstances to quote unquote God spouse them. It's not a great idea. So
my mentor, who's been a very, very devout ceremonial magician for over 12 years now, he was telling me about the specific spirit who comes before he's even finished the first invocation. And he said, like, listen, I know that this spirit has no problem with me. The spirit actually seems to enjoy working with me, but that doesn't mean that I don't take the necessary precautions. I don't trust this spirit. Like, I'm not I'm not a dick to the spirit, but like, I finish the invocation, I do the whole ritual as it is. The spirit's looking at me like, well, do we really have to do this again? And yes, we do, because this is the role that we play, and this is the rules that we're going to go by. And so I think, working with chthonic spirits is, fine, and I support it, but do it the way it's supposed to be done. Stop trying to turn this into like a fairy tale marriage thing.
Yes, I agree. I think that you can do it outside of the confines of ceremonial magic. There are plenty of traditions that work with chthonic spirits, and they're not doing a ceremony kind of thing. But you still have to have the respect. There still has to be something that goes into it. It can't just be like, gosh, I sure wonder what it would be like to like bang a demon. Like I just can't get on board with that.
I think we're talking about it. It's important to consider too, like doing the right works and preparations for certain spirits. Respect is always good. And, the first comment, it's like you'd work with any other kind of group of people or person in real life and consider it under the same circumstances. Like, it's going to be a little different with an ally or a friend that you have an established connection with. Because, somebody I go over their house or I chat with all the time and I've known for a while, that's when, I might be very polite and formal with somebody I just met. But, I go over my homie's house and we're just talking. You know what I mean? Like, I knock on the door and get a bowl of cereal. But I'm not going to meet a bunch of people in a corner, downtown who would just come up to me and be like, what up, man? You want to come chill? And, I just entrust them with the keys to my car and like go to sleep in their house.
Yes, exactly.
And like, because people have agendas, so do spirits, and some of them probably just get off on messing with an idiot. But like the other comment that I'd make in terms of the preparation, and I'm a very ad hoc mage. Like I'm going to be the first one to kind of bend something just to see if it works and not always stick to tradition, even though I find it, it's very important to understand why you are not. And here's the practical thing, and this is something Frater Ocker, I was reading something he did about the Arbitel, that we're working with the Arbitel, and that honestly it kind of came to me in a timely way. And it was one of his writings on working with him directly. And he records almost the entire thing. And it gave a suggestion, or not even a suggestion, described why certain ritual implements, in this case that I was reading, I'm thinking of is like the white linen robe. Because I didn't really understand. I was like, okay, I know some things you can take or toss, and a lot of it's the process of making it, like we were talking about in the first part. But some things have a purpose that goes beyond a symbolic or energized one. Talking about the Olympic spirits, I've been learning about them. And, I learned something in a matter of perspective on how, they're kind and they're beneficent. And, from all my contact with them and hearing about other people's, which is a lot more, they can be very gracious, beautiful spirits that can help you. But, and this is something that he kind of puts into words, and then I've also kind of felt or kind of learned on my own from it, is they're huge. They're immense, powerful. They're like nuclear reactors. That is what, my mental impulse, that intuition by asking about them was. It was like they were like a nuclear reactor, that if you felt them in person, if they came into the physical world on your level before you, it would be like stepping right in front of something of that level. And that's just what they are. They're not malicious, but it's like your spiritual frame is so tiny that energy can just destroy you. And it doesn't mean to. But, and like he states, and I thought it was good to repeat here, like that white linen robe, for whatever reason, it forms a shield. It's like a hazmat suit. And he describes it quite well, for our listeners. Like it makes your spiritual form almost like it makes this reflective barrier around it. So when all that energy hits you, it washes over you or kind of bounces off. So you're safe because it's this pure consecrated thing. So it's not just like you're, because it could hurt you. It's like standing in front of a star or putting your hand on an electric wire. Like you need that insulation. And that also, not to take over the conversation, but there was a lot of insight on some of the roles of angels in planetary magic too. Well, I'll make that quick because I feel like it's warranted. Like in Octavian, I was talking to you. You remember this conversation we had?
Yes.
And it was like, there's a hierarchy of offices to these beings. And the spirits in the planetary powers are often like raw power. But they're not human. Angels can interact with us, and they know the best for us, and they also know the best for nature. because that's kind of their role. They know how to, their role, I think, some of them, especially with these kinds of powers, is to direct that power in a way that is helpful, that is beneficial, if it's for our intent, in a way that's healthy, best for us and best for the world around us and everybody else in it. And they're like, and we were kind of having a thought discussion on it. I was like, well, think about it like this. Can you personally, just you, get the power from its source, like electricity from its source at, say, a reactor or whatever, and with just your two hands, power your house? Can you make that electricity move from that source to its function by yourself? And the answer is, of course, no. We don't have enough hands. We don't. There's not enough. And it's like those. The Olympic spirits are almost like power wells. They're conscious in their themselves, but they're also like giant wells of power that are just their planetary source. And those, the archangels are like the overseers and all the angels beneath them, and they direct it to make sure that it gets down in its emanations to where it needs to go. And they help you. Like, they do all those little, they're like the switch operators, and they're the technicians in the lines, and they're making sure the lines go where they need to go. So when we do those, the pentacles, or we do hexagram rituals, it's like we align those God names and those archangels, and they do all that hard work that we can't possibly do by ourselves. And I thought that was an interesting insight, in that, both Atchers and studying it on kind of the roles that angels play and why we could call on them. So like, they're making sure, and to cut it short, I did a ritual a long time ago where I did tap into a planetary power directly. Like, I did a ritual and then just kind of invoked those energies without an angelic help. And it felt like I touched a live wire, like physically. And I was 3 hours, like, my body would not stop shaking. I thought I was going to seizure. Like, my vision was going, and I had to go to my mentor's house, and I had to do like 3 banishing rituals and then literally call archangels down and balance that power into the ground. And those symptoms went away instantly. And I got that impression, like, hey, that's what we're here for. We help. And I'll cut my story, but I felt it was relevant to our conversation.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard trying to work with some of these big, huge forces. It's hard to grasp anything that's not human.
Yeah. Now, what would you say, a question for you, what would you say the most astounding result you've had in your Solomonic practice? Because I know a lot of people focus on the practical and results stuff. Is there anything you could articulate as maybe the most amazing, or not even amazing, but something that stuck with you, whether for you or for another person that you've heard about from your work?
Let me think. Well, before I actually made the formal pact with the spirits, and there was obviously no sort of like meditative communion or communication that we had with one another. I was asking for their help, and back during that time, I was finding I would go for walks in the woods nearby all the time, and finding these weird rocks with messages painted on them that
interesting.
Corresponded. I still have most of them too. Like, I took them. So they're like my little relics, but there would be these weird things. Like, I would leave flowers as an offering, and then I would find a rock later with a flower painted on it, like I was receiving one back. Or there was lots of ones where it was like I would go out there to pray a bit, to pose a question, to say wishes, to ask for help and guidance, and I would get these very specific I would find these very specific stones with these things and messages and stuff drawn on them, and I never exactly saw who it was that was leaving them. I never saw a person leaving them. I have to assume that they were, but even then, I'm like, why were they leaving them, though? Like, just because there's a person behind it doesn't mean that I don't think that these entities still were kind of driving part of it. Like, it got to the point where there was no explanation. There was no other explanation, because I thought I was going crazy. I was like, okay, there has to be presumably an actual person leaving these. Like, yes, do I think that maybe some spiritual force is just materializing them, it could happen. But that's not, that's not the most parsimonious, right? The
Occam's
most
razor does
logical,
sometimes.
Yeah, the most logical answer is that there is a person leaving them, but they were just so accurate to what I was asking and what was going on. Like, they seemed almost like responses to what I was doing and what I was saying out there, that I just had to assume that there was somehow that me and this whoever was leaving these things there, we had to both be engaged in this kind of like story that these entities were trying to take part in with me. And that doesn't mean that they used the person. I mean, I wouldn't assume that whoever was making them was like possessed or anything like that, but like there was, I mean, to me, it seemed to me like they were made by a child. I think a child made them, or something childlike. As far as proof of them being physically put there by a person, I don't have it. I never saw a person put them somewhere. And in fact, Octavian, talking about Lindsay, who you had on here before, I showed her a lot of those because I thought it was so weird. And I remember showing her one where it was kind of like they'd be in odd spots. Like one was up in a tree somewhere, and, it was like maybe 10 feet off the ground in a tree. I don't even know how I saw it. It was like sometimes it almost felt like something was guiding me to see these things. Like, I don't even know how I found half of them. And I remember sending her a thing and being like, look at how high up this one is. Like, this is so weird. And then after sending her that and having a conversation with her about that, I found one in a tree like 20 feet in the air. I have no idea how this person, if it was a person, I don't know how they got it up there. Climbed the tree, I guess. Cool. I mean, like, maybe they climbed the tree. That is obviously something that they could have done. But it was just so weird that it happened in response almost to me saying to someone else, look at this weirdly placed, stone with this message that's so like weirdly specific. And then to start finding them way higher up in the trees, like so high that I remember I would had to get actual fallen trees to knock them down. Like, trees and branches that were like 15 feet long to get them out of these trees. It was insane. Cool. And then as soon as I made the pact, they were gone. I did not really find them. I think I found a couple like sparsely here and there, but they didn't seem like they were made by the same person. There was something different about them.
You know what's so crazy about that? And before, like, I'm sure you're probably going to be like, why is this guy not in a straitjacket? People have described very somewhat similar experiences after they have either been in contact with Bigfoot or been looking for Bigfoot. This kind of shit happens all the time when you start looking for these kind of cryptid beings.
I was thinking that. I was thinking of what you're saying.
And I think that some of that was mentioned in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. Those books are amazing. Those books are one of the reasons I started this show, honestly.
Awesome. I've only read the one. I've meant to read the other ones that, what's his name? Cutchins?
Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner. And Tim is a close friend of mine and a friend of the show as well.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I loved Where the Footprints End. I've meant to get there's 2 other books, right?
There's just one other right now.
Oh, okay. Maybe the other one is forthcoming then, so... but I was kind of aware of that, and I was kind of thinking to myself, like, oh, well, what if this is some sort of actual, like, spirit in the woods that's trying to communicate? Maybe it's these... I mean, whatever it was clearly able to manipulate reality. Like, whether it was doing it through a person or what, it was finding a way to answer these questions and do things that were way too uncanny for them to be a coincidence.
I'll give you a little synchronicity storm that I had when back in June of last year, I had an experience in the woods where I was walking on a trail. I got to a point of the trail where I had never been before. This area is well known for Bigfoot activity, and I heard basically something whistling at me from behind, and then all of a sudden a tree knock to my right, and then a bunch of birds very frantically flying out of a tree ahead of me. And then I was walking back to my car and I heard something grunt at me. And these woods are small. The biggest things in these woods are deer. And it was not a deer grunt. I know what that sounds like.
Yeah.
Timothy went with me back to that place in January of this year so I could show him what was happening. And a bunch of weird stuff happened. But at one point we were in this area on a bridge. And we started to hear an owl. Now, owls are very, very well known for being the signalers of weird stuff happening. So we hear this owl. And then we stop at a trail, and Tim is looking at something. I can't really see it, but I'm not even looking. I'm looking at my phone because my girlfriend texts me a picture of... So we have a cat named Baby Cat. His real name's Coven, but we call him... He looks like a baby. Like, he looks like a little kitten, but he's a year old. Yeah. He has this very strange resemblance to owls. So she made a collage of his pictures next to a bunch of owls. And I told Tim to look at this picture right after an owl had gone off, and then whatever he was looking at was gone, just gone. And that was the weirdest thing to me. Just the timing of it all was just way too weird.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, like, sometimes when you tell people these stories, like, right, I'm talking about these stories of these rocks in the woods, and I feel like sometimes when other people hear the story, they're like, okay, you found some rocks? Like, they just don't, like, you cannot possibly understand the weirdness of being out there. And oh God, what was it? It was like being out there, and it was because I was doing all this alchemy stuff, and I said something about, like, I was looking for gold. It's a metaphor, obviously, for, you know, like purification and things like that. Looking for gold. My eyes drift up to a tree, and I find a rock that's painted gold and says gold on the back of it. I'm not kidding. Like, this is how spooky and weird these things got. I used to leave apples out there as offerings. One time I came outside and there's just an apple that looks exactly like the ones that I left, except there's a bite taken out of it, and it's sitting perfectly in front of my house, like down the steps. It's just weird stuff would be happening all the time with this woods, and especially around the time when I was having all of that sort of troublesome issues with, like, nightmares and things when I was first trying to prepare to make the pact with the book. That is when the craziest stuff started happening. Like, that was when those rocks with the messages were out there. It was like, I probably sound completely crazy right now. Like, I thought for some reason that I was going to get abducted. Like, I was completely convinced. I didn't understand what these things were around me. And it was the first time that I'd ever encountered something that could affect physical reality to that extent. And there was such a weird feeling around me that I was like, am I going to get, like, abducted, whether it's by fairies, whether it's by aliens? Like, what is going to happen to me? Obviously, those things did not happen. And, you know, eventually, you know, at the end of the whole thing, they were like, surprise, we're angels. And I was like, oh, thank God. Like,
you just said Ian's activation word with aliens.
Well, I was going to say, one, yes, it does, especially when you're describing it, it can sound crazy, but you are not. And this is kind of one of my main focuses in my work, and I think why we kind of joined forces and I came on the podcast. But it's that intersection between magic and traditional occultism and what people call the paranormal or high strangeness. It's exactly that. And most people aren't aware of it, but you are not crazy in exactly that sort of intersection, almost exactly, even the feelings of, like, I'm going to get abducted. There are thousands and thousands of people. It's hard to even understand how many, where these things, exactly as you say, that synchronous, just out of nowhere, almost absurd level physical reality affecting kind of stuff happen. And many are not occultists, what I find so interesting is, you know, we want to explore the intersection between what we call, like, you know, more, at least for me, these different types of entities and how they interact and where they kind of fall in reality away from each other, and you know, how magic can overlay and back and forth. So no, you're not crazy. There's, you know, I think of 30 stories where similar things, you know, have happened. Like, well, let me ask you a question, because you have that in your mind of that experience. And because there's often a lot of peripheral strangeness that sometimes people forget or do not consider. Like when was this? How many years ago would you say?
This was about 2.5 years. Well, just about 2 years ago, honestly. 2 years on the dot, I would say.
Okay. Now, like, a couple of random questions, and those are good. Did you ever have any odd phone calls? Or did you ever have any interactions or spot any weird people or cars during that time that stood out for you?
There were definitely interactions with people that seemed weird. It would almost seem like people were interacting with me in a way in which it almost seemed like they had messages for me, or like they were. I don't want to say that they were they were story-driven side characters that were coming to me for a reason.
That makes sense.
It felt very much like they had a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Fair. Yeah, like it's interesting. Well, if you're interested, we can all discuss it a little more privately, because there's like a whole well of this kind of intersection, and like it's really fascinating. So before on that, but thanks for sharing that experience and the timing of you having your encounter with that physical entity, and you finding these synchronously placed rocks. It's interesting and telling on its own.
Yeah, it was a really interesting experience. I'm glad that I brought it up, because I was not aware that lots of people have such similar experiences. That makes me feel kind of better. It was one of those things where obviously I've always thought that there was some merit to, stuff with UFOs, Bigfoot, fairies, things like that. It's not really what I get into too much. I'm more of an occultist, but that was really the moment where I was like, shit, this is all kind of like the same thing. Like, something is going on here.
The point of this show is to show that there's no difference. That these two are very much, not maybe at the same thing, but they are way more entangled with each other than people realize.
Everything is interconnected. And, one of the things that I often mention to traditional occultists, because you've got certain people who are kind of come to these more occult-based conclusions who are not occultists from the paranormal side of things. Like, talk about them, Jacques Vallée or John Keel. But an intersection point, I think, between some of the entities or the phenomena they're describing in more, UFO cases or hairy monster cases that a lot of people encounter, that are very physical, that are very, as you described, and more traditional occult work. I think it actually has a lot to do with the grimoire traditions, which have only more recently kind of come back into prominence in its revival. But, the person I want to kind of point out is Paracelsus. And I don't know if am I getting his name? Did I just brain fart on?
No, Paracelsus is right, yeah.
Yeah. No. Like his work, he's kind of the grandpappy of naming beings called elementals and their qualities. And he's describing these beings as part of our world, but maybe separate from it in terms of their mental, their matter makeup. We're not going to go into the whole thing on him, but that they are here in our world, and they're very real spirits, distinct from beings like angels, far more down to earth. And then maybe we could look at it in a more modern way. We're using terminology that's kind of theoretical, but maybe like a different frequency or a different, I think you get what I'm saying. Maybe a slightly different molecular makeup or whatever they are, on a different vibration or something. But as a distinguishing from maybe greater or spirits like you may find in the Goetia, or gods or angels, or however we could define them, they seem to be unique and more from our planet, and even more able to interact. But my point of that was, I always kind of tell people, like, look at Paracelsus and some of the work surrounding that, because it really caters to a lot of modern interpretations and stories about the parent, especially talking about these beings in the forest, or as we've discussed, including the instances of prophecy, or just this high-end synchronicity that's like, it's like a communication from something that is very, very real and that can affect you. But magic seems to also be able to affect them.
Yes.
And vice versa. And so any other any other points on this? Because I could go on forever. So I'm gonna hand it back to you guys.
Well, I just think it's so interesting how, and no, this is full credit to you, Liz. The idea of being more of an occultist than a Fortean, as we'll call them.
Oh yeah, yep.
That's been how it's been for forever, and it's only been within the last 2 or 3 years that people have started to see that maybe these distinctions are fading away. And from the research that I've done on my own, and mainly through this show, really, I have really felt this year that the things that people experience on a quote-unquote paranormal basis, it really is what I would call magical fallout. These are things that are of magic, but just weren't contacted in a consciously magic way, but are still affected by magic. And that's why one of the things that we're trying to do, especially with the Arbitel stuff and just with spirits in general, is to ask them and get them to tell us about these specific entities like aliens and cryptids and how to contact them if possible. And I'm hoping, I don't know if this is ever going to go anywhere in the grand scheme of things, but I'm hoping it will show occultists that there is an entire universe of entities that they never thought of that they could be working with in a magical sense.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, like, I would say that to me, the alien entity, the alien presence that I felt, it ended up being the angels. It was not until the moment of initiation, like true initiation with them and the pact making, that I really was like, oh, this is what you are. But it's just, and that's not to say that aliens and angels are the same thing, but what I mean is that they had an alien feeling to me. And that's why I was thinking, like, what are these things? Like, what is going on? And to be fair, I was having all those nightmares, experiencing things that I had to exorcise. So clearly there were some things that were bad hanging around too. So it's like, it was an amalgamation of many things, but it ended up being that the uninitiated eyes that I had was perceiving these angels as like some sort of bizarre, like alien kind of feeling. And that's why I was like, what if I get abducted? Because that's what you think of when you think of aliens. But then it's like, once I had formally actually met them and they opened like a line of communication, then I saw them completely differently. It was as though I could see them with their own eyes and not just mine, like it was, I was seeing them differently. And so, I always wondered that. I was like, I wonder if aliens and angels are like the same thing. I don't know that I think that they're the same thing, but I think that they definitely share maybe a similar space. At least some of these quote-unquote alien encounters could definitely be them. I'm not saying that there aren't other creatures that are doing other things too, because at this point I've experienced so many different kind of like weird entities that I think there's so many different animals. Why couldn't there be so many different entities?
That's my exact line of thought. And I think, I definitely knew what you meant. And one of the theories that I have on that subject, it's kind of the verses like, are we dealing with a plethora of a huge ecology on many levels of different spirits and entities, which I tend to think is true.
I think so.
And, I think it might be less than our aliens, because I tend to, I guess if you had to say personal belief, I'm not saying that there are not, physical beings on other planets somewhere in the universe. I think it's probably likely, but I also think that probably what people are encountering here in calling aliens are probably not that. They're probably something else along more the lines of this. But I guess I think it's more, or this idea that it's more on how we are perceiving spiritual or other forces from our perspective, and how our brains create or project at first what we want or expect or fear to see, and then we get used to them, we get that sort of initiation, and then what they really are comes through. So it could be there are different beings that people are encountering, but at that first step, that alienness hits them, that externality, and it could be a commonality in a lot of these encounters, or more in the root of how we are perceiving them as humans and how our brain works, than even an indication on their objective being yet until we get to know them. So it's probably true that what some people are thinking are aliens or something else may be an angel, or they may be something else for somebody else, but those things may be separate unto themselves. But so that's an interesting discussion, and I think that the discussion about how our brains and how different people specifically, because we all interact with things differently, we all have our takes and our skills on how we communicate with the unseen world, and it goes back to the first part of that conversation. I think it's important, and I think to study that and pay attention to it, like that interface, is just as important as working with the spirits themselves. And I think doing both is going to teach us a lot.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just the world is a lot weirder than I think we realize. And I'm curious, Liz, when you speak to the angels, how direct is the communication? And have you ever asked them or talked to them about things that aren't necessarily magical or pentacle related?
Yeah, they definitely have helped me handle some personal issues, just things that were bothering me. I would say that the directness of the communication depends on me a lot of the time. It's sometimes if I'm just not in the proper mental state, I just can't get into a meditative state as well, and I just don't really get as much out of it. I would say I think it's probably mostly me that dictates that a lot of the time. They seem to be pretty available whenever I actually call them. They've covered a range of topics. They really seem to be willing to answer really any questions that I have. I try not to be, I try not to ask like stupid questions, I try not to do that thing. Like I don't want to do the thing where I'm like asking them things just for them to prove that they're real kind of a thing. Cause it's like, that's silly. Like, look at how far we've come. Plenty has happened for me to know that this is all real, but I try not to ask them things that are like silly, but
would asking them what Bigfoot is out of the question?
What?
Would asking them what Bigfoot is that out of the question?
I feel like there are times when they don't seem to understand certain phrasing, almost as if the way that they look at things is a little bit different.
Yes, I've
I can
heard.
certainly ask
them.
A thing. I could certainly ask them. I have a feeling that they probably will. I would imagine I could get a straight answer from them. I mean, it might be a little roundabout. Sometimes that happens too, where I have to ask them things in a few different ways, or there is also the fact that it doesn't seem like all of them completely agree with each other all the time. Even amongst this like pantheon of spirits, they all act very differently. Like honestly, I swear, two of them, sometimes they show up in groups. Like a couple of them will show up and it'll be like certain ones that I'm talking to at the time. It almost reminds me of in John Dee's Spiritual Diaries, where he, talks about like one, like this time, like Michael shows up with Gabriel, or you know what I mean? It's almost like that, but sometimes there's a mixed version of which ones of them I get. Sometimes I don't really ask or clarify which one is which or who's talking to me. Like it doesn't really matter kind of a thing. Because they have basically established that they do function as a collective kind of, this group of spirits from this book, but they don't always see eye to eye, and they do have personalities. Like I've had it before where like two of them have shown up and one has been nice and explaining something, and the other one is literally just doesn't look like it even wants to be there. Like it's just standing there and it's just like kind of
I have things to do and this isn't it.
Yeah, it's just kind of like one of them will seem impatient and one of them will seem helpful. There are a couple of them which definitely seem like totally caught off guard by things that I say. Like I'll ask a question, they'll be like, "What? No! Like, why would you? Where did you get that? We never said that." Kind of a thing. Like they can't wrap their head around the thinking involved. I guess
I can't help but think that angels are, potentially timeless beings. It kind of goes with kind of how I guess they've communicated with me on how they see us, but it must be like a child, like like an innocent child.
Yeah.
And just kids ask the damnedest things. And then, but it's probably like that. They're never going to be like mad or angry about it, but they're just like,
right.
Can you believe what that kid just asked me?
There's an element of every once in a while, and there's definitely like some that are more stern than others. There's some that seem more like, oh, are you okay? And there's others that are like, shape up, stop this right now. It just kind of depends. You don't know what you're going to get for the day, to be honest, sometimes. But I feel like usually, even if it takes a few meditation sessions, I can usually get my point across for what I'm trying to ask them, even if it is sort of like something more specific that maybe like human intellect would understand better than theirs. Mm-hmm. Usually you can get it across to them after a while.
And I got to imagine that any insight they give you, honestly, there has to be some element of truth via their perspective to it. It might not be like the whole truth that, we want as a person, but it has to be some sort of insight to, he was considering talking like, hey, what is Bigfoot? Like, even if you got, contradictory answers on the level that we'd be thinking about it, there has to be some element of truth, maybe from that angel's point of view, from their role or their personality, that may not even make sense to us. But, I've had this happen too in my work with them. It's like, later on you kind of learn a lot more and you're like, that's what that meant. That I understand what what it kind of meant in that way.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. Like you said, you were thinking you could possibly, ask that question for him to your work. We're in the episode right now, but, if you'd be willing, I also do communication with spirits. It would be interesting if you are interested in doing it. We could definitely do a little blind study experiment and focus on one question. If you'd ever like to, we can discuss it outside the podcast.
I could probably do something like that. I'd have to ask. I think that they would probably be down for it. I try not to, there's always like, I'm always worried that I'm going to treat them like circus animals or something. But
same, 100%. Like, and I say that it's like if it's a potential thing and it's a positive thing and we're both into doing it, maybe we could have a little experiment on that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I think the best way to ask that is say like, what is this thing that humans call Sasquatch? And see if that, if you can play with the wording to get the idea across clearer. But yeah, I think doing kind of like a blind study test on what each thing says is a really cool idea.
Or, just compare notes at least. And I think, at least for me, my put out there, you say, all right, you ask an angel or any kind of spirit, what is a Bigfoot? And I can very well see some of them being like, what?
Right,
and especially if they're more literal and they're like, well, that human over there has big feet. Is that what you wanted to know? Can I go? But I know that there's, when you're working with spirits, and here, we're kind of teasing on the word intent as some people use it. But on the other spectrum, especially when communicating with spirits, in my experience, the intent from a magician plays a big role in how spirits communicate, because they don't really use words, as I understand it. Like you tell them a word, that word has a descriptive power, it has a resonance, but it's also the intent you are putting through into that word. Like you have an idea, you're translating it to language, and then they're picking it up. And I might be wrong, it might not be others' experience, but it seems like the spirits, if you have that pure intent mixed with a very clear idea of what you are trying to convey, they can see what you are trying to convey if you put that power in there. But and that's more for listeners maybe discussing how to do it. But anyway,
we're just out of time, we really loved having you on, and we would love to have you on again because there's so much more we want to talk about. I didn't even get to talk to you about what you thought about the Picatrix and the talismanic method of that. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, no, it was great. I enjoyed this.
Yeah,
very much.
It was a pleasure to meet you and talk to you.
Thank you.
And that was the second part to our interview with Elisabeth. Again, could not be happier to have her on, can't wait to have her on again, and cannot wait to talk to more of you patrons. I would love to do an AMA show at the beginning of next year. So think about your questions, and I'm going to start posting interviews in advance. That way you guys can ask questions for guests. And like I always say, we're going to really, really revamp this Patreon. So again, thank you all so much, and you have a great night, and we will see you again on the Strange Dominions.